My name is Loretta. I'm sitting in my new kitchen, making my own coffee just like I do every morning. The sun is starting to peek through the window, and I can hear the seagulls outside. My daughter is now 14 years old. She's tall like her father and stubborn like me. Sometimes she talks about him, and she said she might want to visit him when she's older and understands more. I told her it's her choice, and I won't stop her. But it wasn't always like this. Let me take you back to the day my world fell apart. I was married to a man named Henry. We had been together for 12 years, and we had a beautiful 10-year-old daughter named Lily. Henry worked as an architect, and I was a paralegal at a small firm in downtown Seattle. One morning in early March, I was standing in our kitchen at 6:30. Henry was making my coffee, as he did every single morning. I used to think it was the sweetest thing. I'd brag to my friends about it when they complained about their husbands. But that day, I noticed something strange. I came downstairs in my slippers, trying not to wake our dog, Max. Henry had his back turned to me. I saw him tap something from a small white folded-over packet into my mug. He stirred it quickly with a long spoon and then turned around, smiling at me like nothing had happened. "Morning, baby," he said. I took the coffee and drank it, telling myself it was probably a vitamin. Henry had been on a health kick lately, ordering supplements from a wellness site. I'd seen the packages stacked in the garage. However, I'd been feeling sick for about 3 months. It was a slow creeping exhaustion. My legs felt heavy when I climbed the stairs, my hair was thinning at the temples, and I was getting headaches behind my left eye. I chalked it up to stress. We'd just taken on a big case at work, and I thought I was burning out. Henry was the one who suggested I see a doctor. He booked the appointment, drove me there, and sat in the waiting room with my purse on his lap. He kissed my forehead before I went in and said he just wanted to make sure I was okay. The doctor was a woman in her 50s, new to the practice. When she came back into the exam room holding my chart, I'll never forget the look on her face. She didn't sit down. She just stood there, staring at the papers in her hand. Then she slowly closed the door behind her. "Are you here alone today?" she asked. I told her Henry was in the waiting room. She nodded and sat on a little stool, but she didn't roll closer to me like doctors usually do. Her hands were shaking, and she put the chart on the counter so I couldn't see. "I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them honestly." "This is very important," she said. I agreed. She asked who prepared my food at home. I told her Henry did most of the cooking. He loved to cook elaborate dinners with French sauces and homemade bread. She also asked about my drinks, and I said Henry made my coffee every morning, packed my lunch, and kept the fridge stocked with smoothies he said were full of antioxidants. Then she asked, "Is there anyone in your life who would want to hurt you?" I laughed because the question seemed so absurd. I told her I had a great marriage, a nice house, and a wonderful family. There was no one who would want to hurt me. That's when she looked at me with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen. She turned the chart so I could see and pointed to a line on the bloodwork. A number. I didn't understand what it meant. She explained slowly that the level was extremely high, catastrophic even. She said a person couldn't reach that level by accident, not from the environment or anything else. Someone had been putting something in me consistently over months. I was in shock. I thought it was a mistake and asked her to run the test again. She said she'd already done it twice, which was why she was late coming back. She leaned forward and whispered that I couldn't go home that night. She asked if I had somewhere safe to go, a sister or a friend. She also warned me not to confront Henry, not to let him know I knew. I had to act normal, tired, and sick, just like he expected. I was crying silently by then. I asked her how I was supposed to walk out and get in the car with him. She said if he knew I knew, he'd finish what he'd started. She wrote the name and number of a detective on the back of a business card. She told me to call from a phone he didn't have access to. I walked out into the waiting room. Henry stood up, smiled at me, and kissed my temple. I told him the doctor thought I might be anemic and wanted me to take iron. He smiled wider and said he'd told me so. He held my hand all the way to the car. The next morning, I called the detective from the landline in the firm's conference room. My hands were shaking so much that I had to dial the number twice. The detective listened to everything I said and then asked if Henry had life insurance on me. I said yes, and we'd taken out policies when Lily was born. He asked how much, and I said it was $500,000. He told me to come to the station that day. He said to tell Henry the first had a long lunch meeting and to take a cab from a few blocks away. At the station, I met with a detective and a female investigator in her 40s with cropped gray hair. They explained that it seemed like a case of slow poisoning, usually with a heavy metal, to mimic a natural illness. They asked if I'd noticed any changes in Henry, like late nights or new friendships. I thought about it and remembered a woman from his office, Rachel. She was the office manager at his architecture firm. She was a tall blonde with a sharp laugh that I'd never liked. She'd started coming around more, and Henry said she and her husband were having problems, and he was just being a friend. She'd been to our house for dinner twice in the last month. The detective asked if Henry had been on any unusual websites or buying strange things. I told them about the supplements and the white packet I'd seen him put in my coffee. The female detective asked if I'd kept any of the packets. I hadn't, but I told them about a high cabinet over the refrigerator that Henry had started using a few months ago. He said it was just paperwork and tax stuff. I agreed to help them. The plan was that I'd go home, keep acting tired, let Henry keep making my coffee, smoothies, and dinners, but I'd stop eating and drinking them. The detective gave me a small thermos and showed me how to pour the coffee into it when Henry wasn't looking and bring it to a drop-off point on my way to work. They'd test each batch and build a case. Meanwhile, they'd surveil the house, the office, and Rachel. I asked how long it would take. The female detective said they'd take as long as they needed, but they'd keep me alive. That night, I went home and cooked dinner with Henry. We watched a movie on the couch with Lily between us. Henry rubbed my feet, asked if I was getting enough sleep, and kissed me on the forehead before bed. But I felt nothing, just a hollow emptiness. The next 6 weeks were the hardest of my life. The hardest part wasn't avoiding the coffee or the smoothies, and it wasn't even the lying. It was Lily. She adored Henry. He'd built her treehouse, taught her to ride a bike, and let her stay up late on Friday nights to watch old movies with popcorn. I had to look at her every day, knowing what I knew, and pretend everything was fine. About 3 weeks in, the female detective called me on the secret phone they'd given me. The lab had confirmed that the substance in my coffee was thallium, a slow-acting poison that was hard to detect. They'd traced the purchase to an online supplier in Eastern Europe, paid for through a digital wallet linked to an email account Henry had set up under a fake name. They wanted to know how involved Rachel was, so they put a wire on me. The next dinner party we hosted, Rachel came over alone. She said her husband was traveling. I was instructed to drink a glass of wine, complain about being tired, and say I'd been to the doctor for more tests. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her eyes filled with tears, and she asked if there was anything she could do. 10 minutes later, when Henry walked her to her car, I went upstairs and watched from the bedroom window. The detectives were parked down the street in an unmarked van. I saw Rachel kiss Henry in the driveway, a long, slow kiss with her hands in his hair. Then she pulled back, laughed that sharp laugh, and drove away. I felt fury for the first time in 3 weeks. The next morning, the detective called and said they had enough to make the arrest within 48 hours. But they needed me to get Henry to confess on tape. We planned it for a Thursday night when Lily was at a sleepover. I made dinner, nothing fancy, just chicken and rice. Henry came home at 6:30, kissed me on the cheek, and asked about my day. I told him I'd been to the doctor again and they'd found something unusual in my blood work. The doctor wanted to talk to both of us at my next appointment. He froze for a second, but then he smiled and asked what they'd found. I said I didn't know, but the doctor seemed worried. After dinner, I said I was going to take a bath. I went upstairs, turned on the water, and then crept back to the top of the stairs to listen. I heard him on the phone. His voice was low and tight. It's not working fast enough. The doctor's getting suspicious. I told you we should have gone with something else. He paused and then said, no. I can't just stop. If I stop and she gets better, it'll look strange. We have to ride it out for a few more months. Then he laughed that ugly laugh and said, relax. She has no idea. She still thinks the iron pills are helping her. I went back to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub, covering my face with my hands and rocking back and forth silently. 20 minutes later, I came back downstairs in my robe and sat on the couch next to him. I asked him if he'd take care of Lily if anything happened to me. He said nothing was going to happen to me, that I'd be fine. I then asked about the insurance money. He went very still, kissed the top of my head, and said we shouldn't talk about it. But his hand on my shoulder was trembling. The next morning at 7 o'clock, they arrested Henry at our front door. I watched from the kitchen window. He turned and looked at me through the glass, mouthing something I couldn't hear. I think it was my name. 2 hours later, they arrested Rachel at her office in front of all her co-workers. The trial lasted 14 months. There were things I heard in the courtroom that I'll never forget. Henry and Rachel had planned my death so carefully. They'd even booked a vacation in Henry's name for 2 weeks after my projected death. Henry got 30 years, and Rachel got 25. The judge said it was one of the most calculated and cruel acts she'd seen in her career. She said it was a slow execution disguised as love. I cried when she said that. After the trial, I had to tell Lily what had happened. I sat her down on her bed, the same bed she'd had since she was 4, with the pink quilt and the stuffed rabbit her dad had bought her. I told her in the simplest words I could that her father had been very sick in his mind, that he'd hurt me on purpose, and that he was going away for a long time. She cried, screamed, and told me I was lying. She begged me to take it back. Then, about an hour into the conversation, she asked if he'd put the poison in her smoothies too. I hadn't even thought of it. The detective had told me there was no evidence he'd targeted her, but I held her and told her she'd been safe and that I'd always be there for her. She cried herself to sleep in my arms, and I sat there until the sun came up. That summer, we moved to a small town near the coast. I took a remote job, bought a small house with a yard for Max, and planted a garden. Lily slowly came back to me. And now, as I sit here making my coffee, I think about how close I came to losing everything. I've learned to trust the quiet voice inside me that says something is wrong. It saved my life, and I hope it can save yours too.